I don't understand it. I don't think we'll ever understand it. All I see is my cousin and his pregnant girlfriend being murdered.
I was told today that the order was canceled. Don't know why. Don't know what caused that.
Have you ever wondered how long the line between a beautiful dream and a horrifying nightmare truly is? Sometimes it is not measured in years or months, but in just 30 short days, and a single gunshot that tears through the silence of the night. Imagine a young man who had just reached the greatest dream of his life, putting on a firefighter's uniform for the first time, his brand new firefighting boots still untouched by dust or the scars of the job. He proudly told his mother that one day he would become a fire captain. But then, without warning, without a chance to fight back, someone quietly walked into the station, pulled the trigger, and completely erased that future. Jordan Melton had only been living his dream for exactly 1 month, one single month. And tragically, his death was not a random accident. He was deliberately targeted because he was about to testify in court against a man who was born to spread death and destruction. But the tragedy did not end there. Jordan was only one of 18 victims hunted down by a professional network of killers, controlled by a man who was just 22 years old, yet had already earned a terrifying nickname, the Grim Reaper. 18 people, 18 lives stolen in a chain of crimes that stretched across 10 different bloody crime scenes. From a 21-year-old woman shot dead right outside her own home, to a young couple who disappeared on Valentine's Day, only for investigators to discover them inside a cold, abandoned vehicle. A young mother was among the victims, leaving this world while still carrying an unborn child who never had the chance to see life. Then came birthday celebrations and former classmates' gatherings that turned into scenes of unimaginable violence. Nights transformed into storms of bullets, with more than 100 shell casings scattered across the streets, leaving countless innocent lives shattered forever. Welcome back to the channel Dark Secrets. What could turn a thriving city into the hunting ground of an underground execution machine? Who was behind the money that placed a price on human lives? And how could a hitman calmly upload 9 photos of himself holding firearms onto social media while police were secretly closing in on him? The horrifying truth behind the unusual suspended sentence that allowed this criminal to walk free will slowly be revealed in today's story. If you feel the weight of these truths and want to join us on this journey to seek justice for the victims, please consider subscribing to the channel right now. Your support is the greatest motivation that allows us to continue exploring the darkest corners of real cases and bringing untold stories into the light in our upcoming documentaries. Before we move deeper into the disturbing details behind this deadly contract, I have a question specifically for you. Take a moment and think carefully. When a devastating tragedy destroys so many lives, what do you believe is more terrifying and cruel? Answer A. The cold-blooded brutality of the person who personally pulled the trigger and ended innocent lives. Answer B. The indifference and failures within the legal system that allowed a dangerous criminal to remain free and pick up a weapon again. Share your opinion by leaving A or B in the comments below this video. Your perspective means a great deal to this channel. Have you ever wondered what truly drives a person to cross the final boundary of humanity and become a walking nightmare? If you only looked at appearance or age, it would have been almost impossible to imagine that a young man who had just turned 22 years old could make the entire city of Birmingham tremble whenever his name was mentioned. People no longer called him by the name given to him at birth. Instead, they gave him a title soaked in darkness and tragedy: the Grim Reaper. It was not a dramatic nickname created for a detective novel or a fictional action movie. It was a terrifying label earned through blood, tears, and the anger of an entire community. The most frightening part of his cruelty was not found in explosive rage or the unpredictable behavior often associated with violent criminals. It was found in something far more disturbing: his complete silence and emotionless calm. When confronted with evidence against him or shown photographs from the crime scenes, not a single muscle on his face changed. No blink, no hesitation, no sign of regret or fear. That coldness felt like a bottomless black hole, swallowing every trace of emotion that an ordinary human being should possess. But the greatest tragedy was not only the brutality of one individual. It began with the very system that unknowingly opened the door for him to return to freedom. Let us go back to 2019, when this young man was only 17 years old. At an age when most teenagers were worried about exams, relationships, or their parents' curfews, he was already holding a firearm and casually opening fire on a vehicle with people inside. This was not a reckless mistake made by an immature teenager. It was a clear declaration of his complete disregard for human life. Yet it took another 4 years before justice was finally delivered on paper. In 2023, he received a 15-year prison sentence for 2 counts of attempted murder. It seemed that this sentence would finally keep him behind bars and protect society from further danger. But then something painfully unbelievable happened on the very day of his sentencing. The judge struck the gavel and announced a 15-year sentence. And on that exact same day, he walked out of the courtroom with his shoulders raised high, carrying himself like a victorious man. 13 years of that sentence disappeared through the mechanism of a suspended sentence. The reason? The time he had already spent in pretrial detention was considered sufficient to offset the 2 years of actual imprisonment required under the law. This was no longer just a simple legal loophole. It was like a wide-open highway paved with opportunity, leading a dangerous criminal straight back onto the streets. That misplaced mercy from the legal system came with a devastating price. Only 90 days. Exactly 90 days after walking out of court with a suspended sentence, the horrific shooting at Fire Station Number 9 took place, marking the beginning of a bloody chain of violence that would spread fear throughout the entire city. People were forced to ask a painful question. During those 90 days, where were the authorities? Where were the monitoring systems? Was anyone watching the movements of a man who had just been released after opening fire on innocent people? The answer was no one. That failure of oversight transformed what was meant to be an act of legal mercy into a permission slip for unimaginable tragedies that followed. And for the next 6 months, while investigators worked tirelessly behind the scenes, connecting the smallest pieces of evidence from 10 separate murder scenes, this killer lived a life of shocking freedom. He did not hide. He did not disappear into the shadows of the city. He did not attempt to erase his tracks. Instead, he treated his violence like an achievement, something to display proudly. With a level of arrogance that challenged the entire justice system, he recorded himself holding weapons, posing with confidence, and uploaded those images directly onto social media. Not once, not twice, but 9 separate times over a period of just 6 months. Try to imagine the disturbing irony. In a modern society where most people use social media to share memories, meals, vacations, and moments from everyday life, this young man turned the internet into a public diary of his crimes. He repeatedly posted photographs of himself holding firearms, with such confidence that he treated violence like entertainment and used social media algorithms to amplify his presence. He craved attention. He wanted the world to look at him, and he showed complete contempt for the possibility of being tracked down by investigators. Every image he uploaded was a direct challenge to law enforcement, and another painful wound inflicted upon the families of his victims, those who spent every day hoping the person responsible would finally face justice. He transformed himself into the main character of a bloody story written entirely by his own hands. A story where he danced on the failures of the system and the fear of an entire community. And that arrogance continued, until the number of victims was no longer just one. It had risen to a horrifying total of 18 lives lost. When looking at the bigger picture of this endless chain of tragedies, stretching across 10 blood-soaked crime scenes scattered throughout the streets of Birmingham, it is easy to fall into the trap of pure anger and immediately blame everything on the impulsive violence of a disturbed and unstable young man. It is simple to paint the entire story with a few dramatic strokes. A killer known as the Grim Reaper, walking through the streets with a gun in his hand, firing at anyone unlucky enough to cross his path. But if we pause for a moment and calmly peel away the layers hidden behind court documents, criminal indictments, and the fragments of evidence revealed throughout the investigation, a far colder, more terrifying truth begins to emerge. This entire chain of tragedies was not simply the result of a reckless outburst or the isolated madness of a lone killer. What happened in Birmingham over those 14 months was something far more disturbing. The the smooth operation of a dangerous murder-for-hire enterprise buried deep within the city's criminal underworld. It was a network built on calculation, organization, and clearly divided roles, containing every component of a dark criminal supply chain: the person who ordered the killing, the individuals who gathered information and provided targets, the middlemen who transferred the money, and finally, the person who pulled the trigger and carried out the execution. The true horror of this case was never just the sound of gunfire. It was the complete commercialization of human life. Inside that cruel underground world, a person's existence, dreams, and future were stripped of all human value and transformed into a product, something that could be priced, purchased, negotiated, and eliminated through a blood contract. Everything operated through absolute indifference, where dirty money decided who would become the next person lying beneath the yellow police tape. Look at the death of Jordan Melton to understand the devastating reality of this criminal system. When the shooting at Fire Station Number 9 occurred on a scorching summer day in 2023, the local community and media were overwhelmed by shock and confusion. The incident was initially described as a random attack, a horrifying moment when an armed man walked into an open fire station and began shooting at firefighters who were simply doing their jobs. The story of a young man who had only been in the profession for 1 month, suddenly having his life taken away, touched thousands of people. But the court documents released afterward completely destroyed the idea that Jordan's death was random. Jordan Melton did not fall victim to a cruel twist of fate. He had already been selected. He had been watched. And he had been targeted as part of a carefully planned operation designed to silence him forever. Before the tragedy occurred, Jordan had received an official court subpoena and was preparing to provide crucial testimony against Larry Rollins Jr., a figure connected to another homicide case from 2021. Jordan was not simply an innocent person who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was a dangerous loose end for the criminal world, a witness whose testimony could potentially send a powerful figure behind bars. And because of that, he had to disappear before he ever had the chance to stand before the courtroom and tell the truth. The death of this young firefighter was a textbook example of a witness elimination assassination, where the person who pulled the trigger was nothing more than the hand carrying out an order from someone else, hiding safely behind the curtain of the criminal underworld. The arrogance and brutality of this criminal network continued to spread into the case of Anthony Love Jr., a hard-working employee at a UPS facility. Anthony was described as a kind and dedicated young man who spent most of his life focused on his job, his passion for video games, and his family. He had no involvement in conflicts, rivalries, or criminal disputes. Yet in April 2024, Anthony was shot and killed in the parking lot where he worked every day, leaving his coworkers frozen in disbelief. As investigators followed financial trails and digital evidence, they uncovered a horrifying truth. Anthony's death was a cash-paid murder contract. The person accused of orchestrating this tragedy was Charles Nance, a man who allegedly collected Anthony's personal information, his movements, his license plate details, and his work routine. That information was then transferred, along with an upfront payment, to the person who carried out the killing, all in exchange for the life of a completely innocent man. The life of a hard-working employee was reduced to a stack of bills exchanged in the shadows. And the horror did not end there. Following the same pattern of a corrupt financial transaction, Charles Nance was also linked to the death of Charlie Moore, a 61-year-old man who was brutally murdered inside his own apartment in August of the same year. The life of a young worker trying to build a future and the life of an elderly man who had already spent decades contributing to society were both placed on the same horrifying marketplace, where criminals decided when another heartbeat would stop. This network did not end with a few individuals or isolated contracts. It developed into a complicated web of connections stretching throughout Birmingham's criminal underworld. When court documents related to the murder of Jamarcus McIntyre were revealed, the public was once again forced to confront a disturbing reality. This was not the work of a single person. Behind the crime were multiple individuals working together, including Larry Rollins Jr., Eddie Jones, and DeMarco Beck. One by one, more names connected to this wave of violence were exposed. Lorenzo Wiley, in the shooting death of Reginald Bryant. and Nequan Lawler and Kashawn McLamore Bruce in the mass shooting that destroyed a former students' gathering at Hush Lounge. By identifying each person connected to these crimes, prosecutors unintentionally created a horrifying personnel directory of Birmingham's underground world. A directory where those with money paid for the killings and placed the orders, those with information and connections located targets, tracked victims, and provided details, and those with the willingness to use violence became the trigger pullers. The combination of greed, emotional emptiness, and access to weapons created a hidden machine of death powered by money. The greatest source of heartbreak and outrage for the victims' families, and for society as a whole, is the existence of these hidden masterminds. The person holding the gun may be the one who spreads fear across the streets, but those sitting comfortably in secure rooms, opening their wallets to pay for someone else's death, represent an even darker and more cowardly form of evil. They hide behind wealth. They never have to touch the blood. They never have to face the terrified eyes of their victims. And yet they continue walking through society like ordinary citizens, while 18 families are forced to carry the unbearable pain of losing someone they love. The fact that a murder-for-hire network could operate openly and efficiently in a modern city for more than a year without being discovered or stopped is not merely a tragedy. It is a wound that continues to bleed. A painful reminder that a criminal darkness can quietly grow beneath the surface of society, manipulating lives, ignoring the sacred value of human existence, and challenging the very foundation of compassion and decency itself. When looking back at the entire picture of this devastating chain of crimes, people are often drawn to the dramatic moment when the suspect is finally placed in handcuffs in front of television cameras, or to the shocking headlines announcing that a major case has been solved. But few people truly understand the incredibly difficult, silent, and emotionally exhausting journey that unfolds behind the scenes of a criminal investigation, or the pain that families are forced to endure once the case enters the courtroom. Solving a single murder case is already an enormous challenge for any investigative agency. But connecting 10 separate shooting scenes, stretching across 14 months throughout the streets of Birmingham, and linking dozens of broken pieces of evidence back to the same killer and the criminal network behind him, was a long and exhausting battle that required extraordinary patience, precision, and determination. Nothing happened as quickly or as dramatically as it does in fictional television shows. There were no instant breakthroughs, no simple answers, and no perfectly timed moments of discovery. The reality was far slower and far more complicated. The investigation unfolded carefully, methodically, and at the cost of thousands of hours of continuous work from detectives, trying to navigate through a maze of conflicting information and unanswered questions. The true turning point in this massive investigation came after the horrifying tragedy outside Hush Lounge, on the night of September 21st, 2024. At that blood-covered scene, where 4 people lost their lives and 17 others were injured, investigators had to work painstakingly through the aftermath, carefully collecting, examining, and marking every piece of evidence among a sea of approximately 100 shell casings scattered across the pavement, nearby walls, and surrounding vehicles. Those 100 shell casings recovered that night were not merely cold pieces of evidence representing unimaginable violence. They became a wake-up call that finally shattered the silence and fear that had surrounded the entire city. Public anger reached a breaking point, pushing the Birmingham community to overcome hesitation and come forward. More than 300 tips and pieces of information from ordinary citizens, from a quickly captured photograph, a dashcam recording, to a whispered message from someone who knew something was wrong, were sent to investigators. It was these courageous members of the community, ordinary people who recognized suspicious details and chose not to remain silent, who became the true key to opening the dark door that had hidden this criminal network for months. Through highly detailed ballistic examinations under the microscope, combined with witness testimony and the careful tracing of suspicious financial transactions, investigators slowly began connecting individual points on the criminal map. From the shooting at Fire Station Number 9, to the heartbreaking death of young Mia Nixon, to the contract killing of UPS driver Anthony Love Jr., and finally to the mass shootings connected to local lounges. And perhaps, one of the most bitter ironies of this entire investigation was the role the suspect himself played in his own downfall. While police were quietly connecting every small piece of evidence, the young man, driven by a desperate hunger for attention and an illusion of online immortality, unknowingly handed prosecutors some of the strongest evidence against him. The 9 social media posts showing him holding weapons and posing with a defiant attitude became the final pieces that strengthened the criminal case against him. His arrogance and obsession with gaining attention through social media algorithms transformed him into the person who ultimately helped deliver himself to justice. It was a painful reminder that behind the cold image of a criminal who viewed himself as the Grim Reaper was also recklessness, immaturity, and a shocking lack of intelligence. However, just when the public believed that justice had finally begun to prevail, after the suspect was arrested and brought into the light, a new nightmare began. A nightmare called courtroom delays, uncertainty, and endless waiting. The first trial specifically related to the Trendsetters Lounge massacre was originally scheduled for April 2026, carrying the exhausted hopes of dozens of victims' families who had waited for the day when justice would finally be served and the person responsible would be held accountable. But that fragile hope was painfully destroyed when the trial was postponed and rescheduled for January 25, 2027. Even more frustrating, the defense attorney representing the accused killer stood before the court and calmly requested an even longer delay, potentially pushing the trial into 2028 or even 2029, arguing that more time was needed to review evidence and prepare a defense. Try, for just a moment, to place yourself in the position of those fathers, mothers, brothers, and sisters sitting in the courtroom gallery. Feel the cruelty behind that request. 2 more years. 3 more years. Those are not merely numbers written on a lawyer's calendar or a judge's schedule. They represent thousands of additional days and nights filled with grief, anxiety, longing, and emotional wounds carried by families who have permanently lost someone they love. Tamisha, the mother of Angelia Webster, the young woman who died alongside her unborn child 7, described to reporters how hearing about the delay made her feel as though her entire world collapsed all over again. She said it felt like being transported back to the first day she received the devastating news. After 2 years of waiting, enduring unimaginable pain, while holding on to the hope of a courtroom verdict, one simple scheduling decision pulled her and dozens of other family members straight back to the beginning of their suffering. The most painful and infuriating contradiction exists within the legal system itself. The 18 victims' families are forced to wake up every day carrying emotional exhaustion, physical fatigue, and endless uncertainty, waiting for a moment of justice that continues to move further away into an unclear future. Meanwhile, the man accused of causing so many deaths remains safely behind prison walls, provided with housing, given 3 meals every day, protected by legal representation, and able to submit request after request seeking more time and a longer delay. The slow pace of the legal process has unintentionally become a second punishment, one that falls upon the survivors rather than the accused. It has transformed the search for even the smallest measure of justice for the victims into a painful psychological battle with no clear ending in sight. The silence that fills the courtroom after every delay is not simply an empty space of time. It is a painful emptiness that slowly eats away at the souls of those left behind. When the television cameras turn off and the crowds of curious observers disappear, the most painful question remains, hanging heavily in the minds of everyone affected. Who is truly responsible for this tragedy? It is easy to direct all of our anger toward the young man wearing an orange prison uniform, his eyes cold and emotionless. That anger is completely justified. But if we stop only at our hatred toward one individual, we risk overlooking a far more painful truth. The person responsible did not simply walk onto the streets with unlimited arrogance and violence. He was enabled by a system that failed to stop him long before. The 13-year suspended sentence given to someone who had previously fired shots into a vehicle carrying people was not just an unfortunate mistake. It was a reflection of an overwhelmed legal system, a system where sentencing agreements and decisions to release individuals can become routine procedures, while ignoring the human consequences and the safety of the community. Birmingham City Council member LaTanya Tate once described this level of selfishness and moral decline as completely unacceptable. But that selfishness does not exist only within the person who pulled the trigger. It also exists within a legal machine that can operate without emotion, where the negligence of a single judge or prosecutor may unintentionally contribute to the deaths of 18 innocent people. The justice system has no single face to blame. And that very anonymity makes the pain of the victims' families feel even more hopeless. However, even in the darkness of indifference and cruelty, human love and resilience can still rise above the tragedy, transforming pain into a powerful legacy of healing. Look at the journey of Rochelle Gaston Malone, the mother of firefighter Jordan Melton. 3 years have passed since she lost her only son. Yet every year, on the anniversary of his death, she continues to wear the color orange. Orange, Jordan's favorite color, and also a symbol of the fight against gun violence, has become her source of strength, her reason to keep moving forward. She has openly shared the wounds that never fully disappeared, the mornings when grief became overwhelming, the moments when even the smallest tasks felt impossible, like simply trying to prepare an omelet for herself. But instead of allowing bitterness to consume her, she transformed her heartbreak into something meaningful. She wrote the book, Embracing a New Normal, and created an annual support fund, bringing together mothers who have lost their children so they can hold on to one another, honor their loved ones, and find strength together. Rochelle's journey is perhaps the most powerful reminder of what life truly means. Healing does not mean forgetting. Healing means learning how to carry the pain with courage while using it to protect those who are still here. The 18 lives taken are 18 permanent scars left upon the city of Birmingham. But the voices of more than 300 courageous citizens, along with the endless determination of the victims' families, prove one undeniable truth: darkness will never completely win. This story is not only a warning about the failures and weaknesses within the justice system, it is also a moral responsibility placed upon all of us. We must never turn away from injustice. Justice may be delayed. Court dates may be pushed further into the future. But as long as the community continues to keep the flame alive, continues to speak their names, and continues to remember those 18 lives, their stories, their impact, and their legacy will never disappear. They will live on forever.